There, we got that. Thank you, Betty. As you can see, Betty is our technician tonight. Craig is taking the night off with his son to go to a football game.
Right.
Oh, nice. Oh, the Dolphins game.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think he said it was a Father's Day gift or something.
Yep.
Nice.
Nice.
Father-son time. So we observe Veterans Day today, and we have at least one veteran here, I believe. That's Marty. Anyone else a veteran of the armed forces? No, so we have Marty. Okay, well, Marty's gonna help me then get into this subject.
Uh-oh.
We're dealing with mitzvot, and we're going to talk today about the issue of kavanah. Kind of the modern word is mindfulness or intention. Kavanah is a Hebrew word that comes from kivun, direction, so that it's directing yourself. It's having intention when we do something. So, oh, here comes Friedman's. Got at least Fred on there. So, Marty, can you think way back to basic training? You remember? I'm sure you remember basic training. So, probably in basic training, there were certain things you had to do every single day, almost as a ritual, right?
Yeah, I guess, I never thought of it that way.
It was like as a regular kind of thing you had to do every day.
Every day.
So what kind of things did you do?
Well, boot camp is different than regular basic training. You have to understand at that time, and it's a whole different world. So we, of course, we got up, we cleaned ourselves up, and then went to the mess hall, had our breakfast, whatever you want to call it, and then we either be on a march or we'd be doing exercises, and in the morning, that would be basically it. By the afternoon, we were doing other stuff, going to class. Bayonet practice was a couple, normal thing. And,
Okay, so Marty, why did they make you march every day? What if you didn't feel like marching?
Well, let me just put it this way. Walter Winchell said that if your son was in Korea, send him a package. If he was in Paris Island, pray for him. So, I can only tell you that you did not. There was no. Quite frankly, the first thing you learned when you went into boot camp was the drill instructor was not a drill instructor, he was God, and that was it, But no, you had a march. Marching was, first of all, it built up your stamina. Secondly, in marching, you learn to march in a manner that from the air, if somebody was looking down, they don't see people marching. Basically, they just see a block, and they can't see because everybody's a step. And it was very important that you got into step and you marched all at the same time, doing what it is. So that was
okay. Well, that'll help me get into this. Thank you, Marty. So now think about everybody think about your lives today. What things are kind of that you do as either a habit, not because you have to, you have to eat, you have to relieve yourself, you have to breathe. Those are the have-tos, but there are certain things you do every single day, whether you feel like it or not. For most people, brushing their teeth today is a ritual. You don't feel right if you haven't done that, if you haven't washed up. Even if you don't need to, most people wash in the morning out of ritual, right? There are certain things that you do in a ritual way, whether you want to or you don't. In fact, even days that you don't feel like it, you're going to do it. Right? I mean, that is what we're talking about. There's a difference between doing a mitzvah because it is a daily act, something you just do because it's something you do, like marching was something Marty had to do, whether he felt like it or not, and whether he knew why it was or not. It was what he was told to do, he had to do it. There are things we do that way, and then there are things that we do with intention. Things we do with intention. And sometimes there are moments when the things we do in a ritual way, we do with intention. There are some times when it happens that you might be brushing your teeth and it's not just the ritual of it, but you actually feel it. You experience it. You are in that moment. It may not happen too often. Or you're washing your face and you're seeing yourself, and it's more than just ritual. There's something you're aware of. You might look like your mother or your father at that moment, and you see in that moment something there that is beyond just the ritual of washing your face. Any of you, does this bring up anything?
Yeah.
Resonate? Tell me an experience like that.
I think it's important. You have to be in the present. Sometimes our mind wanders because it's an everyday occurrence, or a twice or a 3-day occurrence. But I think to focus that way, we have to be in the absolute present.
Right, but it isn't the norm. The notion of being kind of, as you're saying, present, of having real intention, of being mindful, those are moments that happen, but not usually on a daily basis for most people. Unless they go through a daily meditation where they deliberately do it and then it becomes ritual. Yes, Roger.
I just got a new water pick, toothbrush and water pick combo. Since you brought up brushing your teeth.
Okay.
And probably you all know this, it's on a timer, right? Every 30 seconds it changes, and then you know to go on to the next movement. So to me, it's kind of taking on, I've only been doing this a few days, a new ritualistic experience, because it's sonic, you know, it's like, it's new, and I know like it's into quarters or halves, it's this side. So I'm like, my intention is to finish the 2 minutes. When I was using the regular brush, I never really knew how long to do it, you know, but this is time. So I know, okay, 30 seconds here. So it's pretty interesting that it's made it a really a more enjoyable experience. I look forward to it now. I know exactly how long I'll be brushing for. I don't have to guess. And I'm too involved in the ritual to really look in the mirror and see how I'm looking. Just
Right.
waiting for the timer.
But Roger,
So I can get the brush stroke right.
but Roger, this is still so new for you
Yes.
that you're experiencing it. You're still experiencing it.
Yeah.
But there will probably come a time, not too long, when it will become rote, where you'll do it matter of fact, because the machine itself will take you through it. You won't every time experience it like you are now, right?
Probably. Yes, I see what you're saying.
Well, and so that's kind of the issue. Some people, like it's a mitzvah, let's say, to pray, right? To do shacharit, to do the morning prayer. Okay, so there are some days when if you do that on a regular basis, you're just going through it. Even if you're in a community, you're saying the words, or you're not even saying the words, you're there. You're kind of experiencing it. But every once in a while, something hits you and you're in the moment. All right, so that's kavanah, intention. So we're going to look at 3 texts where our tradition tries to get us to understand what is more important, or how should we deal with the fact that most ritual is not mindful on a regular basis. That what things we do on a ritual basis don't often carry with it a special elevation of spirit. But every once in a while, they do. And does it still count? Is it a mitzvah? Have you fulfilled your mitzvah if you didn't intend to, if you weren't even thinking about it? And the example we're going to look at is the shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah. That's, those of you that have read it have seen this. So let me share the first one with you, and we'll go into our screen share. Okay, look at that. I'm always amazed that I get that done right. Okay, so Mishnah, I don't know if you're all aware what the Mishnah is. I hope you are, but after basically the Torah and the Tanakh, the next real code book for us is this Mishnah. Mishnah was compiled, we believe, around the year 200 to 210 CE. And it was the main person that led that compilation was Judah the Prince, Yehuda Nasi. And much of the Mishnah is about law. It has less of the Midrash in it. The Talmud has more of that. Talmud is also about law. We're going to look at that next. But here is the case in the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah. So I'll go to my reader since she's online. Bobby, would you please start us off?
Sure, I would be very happy to. One who blows shofar into a cistern or into a cellar or into a barrel. If he, she, or he heard the sound of the shofar, he or she has fulfilled the obligation.
Okay, Bobby,
Yes.
let's stop there for a minute. Why would someone do that, first of all? Does anybody have an idea? Why would they blow it into a barrel or a cellar or a cistern? So Joni said punishment. If there,
For blowing it, if it would be.
See if it's their sound.
oh, you mean to do it privately,
Yeah.
silently?
Yeah.
What about, Gail, the sound?
Yeah, to hear it. Does it work? I mean, what does it sound like?
Okay, well, what does it sound like when you blow it into a cellar
Uh-huh, I don't know.
or a barrel?
Maybe you're trying not to disturb the neighbors, or if you're in an apartment house, you don't want other people to hear it. They'll think an alarm's going off.
That could be that you're blowing the shofar to hear it with nobody else to hear it, right? So maybe in secret. Maybe you're in it. Remember, they lived in a world where it wasn't always a good thing to carry out a mitzvah,
Mhm.
right? In order to be safe, maybe this person was blowing it in a private place. Now, if that person heard the sound of the shofar, now you would assume because they blow it, they heard it. We'll get to that. But by hearing that, they fulfilled the obligation to hear it. This is, of course, on Rosh Hashanah.
Mhm.
The assumption is we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, the obligation to blow the shofar, to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah.
Mhm.
Bobby, next sentence, please.
If she heard the sound of an echo, she has not fulfilled the obligation.
Okay, so now the shofar gets blown, and now we're no longer in secret. Now we're in a place where there's an echo. And the person doesn't hear the first blast, they hear the echo, right? So it goes do 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 do, and they hear the second or third echo, not the blast. This states that they have not fulfilled their obligation because they didn't actually hear the shofar, they heard an echo. Okay, so let's stay with that for a minute and we'll move.
I would think,
Yeah, Gail?
I would think that it's just maybe not as good, but if you're attempting to use it, at least you've tried and you're hearing something.
Well, that is an argument, but of course the Mishnah is not allowing that here. But
Okay.
see, this goes on further. So let's go to the third sentence.
And so too, he who was passing behind a synagogue or whose house was adjacent to a synagogue and heard the sound of a shofar or the sound of someone reading the scroll of Esther on Purim, if he had intention for the commandment, she has fulfilled the obligation.
Right.
But if not, he has not fulfilled the obligation. Even though both people listened, only one of them had intention.
Okay, so this case, someone walking next to the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, talking about a Jew, right? Because the obligation to hear it is for Jews.
Gosh.
Or their house, they're in their house, which is right next to a synagogue, right?
Yeah,
They hear the shofar blown, right?
Yeah.
about an hour.
Gail, if you would go on mute, please.
I'm
Oh, so if they hear the shofar blown, right? If they intended to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing the shofar, then they did. But if they didn't, if they had no intention of hearing the shofar, they just heard it. But they weren't, they had no expectation of hearing the shofar or that it would fulfill the mitzvah, then it doesn't count. And that's true for hearing the reading of the Megillah. That's the other one, because they're going by the synagogue or they live next to the synagogue, unless they intended to. If they intended to listen, then it counts. So that's the issue of kavanah, intention, right? So we're going to now look at source number 2, because that means that if you were brushing your teeth and you had the intention to brush your teeth, but what if you did something without any intention at all? Let's say, can you give me an example of that? You had no intention to do it, but you did it.
Yes, I can.
Okay, what? Rachel?
You're driving to a corner and it seems like habitually your car automatically makes a right turn when your intention was to turn left.
Okay, because you usually go right, but today you're supposed to go left.
Go left, but
So you follow your path.
yeah, it just your hands moved unintentionally and turned the car right.
Right. Okay, let's
So I know it happens.
right. All right. How about let's do a mitzvah? What if you're walking down the street or you're in your car and someone is on the street asking for money and you don't even think about it, you just give them a quarter. But you didn't intend to fulfill a mitzvah of tzedaka. It never occurred to you about tzedaka. You didn't even think about it being tzedaka. You just thought, okay, here's a guy, I'm going to give him a quarter because he needs it. So you had no intention. So did you fulfill it or not?
No,
Not according to this.
Right, not according to this Mishnah. If you thought, oh, there's a guy who needs some help, I want to give him tzedakah. I want to give him tzedakah, so I'm going to give him a quarter. Then I fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah. Okay? So that's what the Mishnah is doing. When it looks at it and says, we have two kinds of ways to do a mitzvah. One where we do it by rote, like we know that we're going to, let's say you're a regular minyan goer and you go every day to minyan. You go out of just because it's what you do. You're not thinking about the mitzvah. You're not thinking that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. You're just going there to be part of the group. You've done it every day for years and you do it. That's one way of doing the mitzvah. This seems to say that that might not count because you have no intention. It gets more nuanced than that. And so we're going to go on to the next one.
Rabbi, can I say-
Yes, Oliva.
So what I was thinking was, let's say you had no intention of hearing the shofar, okay? But then all of a sudden, when you do hear the shofar, that could be a very spiritual moment for you. And at that moment, you could be really savoring it and wanting to do that mitzvah of hearing it at that moment. And the same thing with, I think, what you were saying about if you didn't have the intention to give tzedakah, but what if at that moment you decided, oh, that person, I want to give tzedakah. You know, it's more of like a mindful moment. Does that count?
Well, so that's part of what the tradition is trying to deal with here is it okay just to do a mitzvah without thinking about it? Is that valuable in and of itself? And is there a difference in quality between doing it that way and doing it with intention, where you're what we would say mindful of what you're doing at that moment? Is that a higher kind of level, or are they both equal? Right? You know, the notion is, because after all, in order to get to 10 people for a minyan, you need 10. Not all of them have to pray. Well, after all, in a traditional minyan, what happens if someone is a Jew but doesn't know how to pray those words, doesn't know Hebrew, and it's a minyan that's traditional, right? But the fact that they're there means the minyan counts as a minyan, and so they've completed the minyan, so they've gotten a mitzvah, but they have no involvement in it other than physically being there. Right? So part of this is to look at what a mitzvah is, or what the deed is, and why we do mitzvot, and what the purpose of them are. Right? So let's look at the Talmud, and then we'll.
Kathy wanted to go.
Rabbi, so-
Yeah, I can't see you.
So do some of them, like with the listening to the Megillah, the mitzvah is that you have to listen. Sometimes when you listen, it's more spiritual than others, but that doesn't matter for that particular one. For listening to the shofar and listening to Megillah, you just have to intentionally listen. It doesn't mean you really have to hear or be affected by it. It
Right.
just means you have to listen.
You fulfilled then the mitzvah.
When you go
Of-
to pray, you're there. Sometimes you're just going through the motions, and sometimes it's meaningful.
Right.
Now, I know Heschel says if you do the ritual enough, sometimes you're going to get what you're supposed to get. So
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the notion that they might be tied together in that the more often you do something, the greater the chance that you may have those spiritual moments. But the opposite is also true. The more ritually you do it, the less often you might have an elevation, because it is done so often, you just do it out of rote, right? So, you know, since we have a system of mitzvot, that's why our sources are trying to figure out what is the point of doing a mitzvah if you're not really into that mitzvah? Your mind isn't there, your soul isn't there. What is the point? What does it mean that it counts? And are there levels of doing this? So the Babylonian Talmud here, which is the second source, all of you know the Talmud came after the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is the basis for the Talmud. So the Talmud quotes a Mishnah and then has a series of discussions about that Mishnah section. Then it quotes another Mishnah. Then it has a series of discussions. They're not always on subject. The Talmud is a compiled book over hundreds of years, and it's a series of different editorial processes. But here we're dealing with this issue. So who would like to read the Babylonian Talmud part?
I will.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, come and hear the answer based on another instance. If one was walking behind the synagogue or lived near the synagogue and heard the sound of the shofar or of the Megillah, if one had intention, one fulfilled their obligation. And if one did not have intention, one did not fulfill one's obligation. Does this not refer to obligation to fulfill a commandment? No. It refers to requiring intention to listen, but one heard the sounds automatically. One might have thought it was merely the sound of a braying donkey.
Okay, so now that's part of the point. Part of the point is if you hear a shofar and you don't see the shofar, you don't see anyone blowing it, how do you know? I mean, how do you know the difference between a backfire and a gunshot, or a firework and a gunshot? You know, most people wouldn't have any idea how to distinguish one from the other. How would you know if it were a shofar or the sound of, in this case, a braying donkey? It's a sound. It's disassociated from the actual blowing of the shofar itself because you don't see it. Now, obviously, with the scroll of Esther, unless you couldn't hear the words and it just sounded like mumbling, right? You could hear mumbling, but you didn't know it was Hebrew. You didn't know it was the story of Esther. But with a shofar, you could mistake it, right? So this one is saying the fact that you heard it, if you could distinguish it was a shofar, you fulfilled the mitzvah. But if you didn't know it was a shofar, if you just thought it was a donkey or some other random sound, you haven't fulfilled it. You have to know that that's what you heard. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Rabbi, I don't think that's fair.
Okay, Roger, why isn't it fair? I'm waiting out of the stop share. I want to see you.
All right.
There we are.
It's not fair because you actually heard it.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's different levels of Zedaka. I've read that.
Right.
Say, this happened to me the other day. A guy came up, asked for money. The minute I walked out of the store, I didn't want to turn him down. I gave him $1. You know, he was looking at the money I had in my hand. He wanted to ask for 10. You know, I said, I could tell. I said, no, that's it. Another lady came by. He asked for some money. She says, no, I'm not giving it to you. But yet I gave him the money. She
Right.
definitely didn't. You know what I mean? But
Well-
I mean, the whole thing is what if 2 days later you said, my God, that was a shofar. I heard the shofar. Why do you have to recognize it exactly at that time? Right? I mean, you should say, that was a shofar. I did it. I heard the shofar. I didn't even know it.
Well, but you.
So then you get to that moment you're talking about. When do you get that? Oh my gosh, this is it. This moment of understanding, of clarity. It doesn't have to be at that time. You have to say, gosh, that's a shofar. Now I know what it is. That's a mitzvah. I gave this guy $1 and he fed his family.
Okay, well, if there's nothing, it's a good thing to give him $1, but is it the mitzvah of tzedakah? But let's ask about the shofar. If you listen to the shofar and didn't know it was a shofar, 2 days later, this is your instance,
Yes.
you realize, oh, I heard a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Well,
Yes.
it's not Rosh Hashanah anymore. You didn't hear it on Rosh Hashanah because you weren't conscious of it. You had no idea that's what you heard. It could have been anything, a random sound. Now, in retrospect, you want that to count.
Yes, I'm lazy like that. I am.
Okay.
I'm a lazy guy. Yes.
Well, wait, Alice, I'm going to call on you in a second, but Joni is right here and she has something to say.
It seems like that's all very esoteric, which it, you know,
seems to be anyway with the Mishnah. But what if the mitzvah, like tzedakah, involves another human being? Does it matter if you had the kavanah, if you helped someone else? Isn't it dependent on whether or not the tzedakah did what it was supposed to do, not so much whether you meant to do it for, to get mitzvah points?
Okay, so let's talk about, Roger said, we know about Maimonides' 8 levels of tzedakah, right? So the first thing is, and Joni's raising the question, you've actually done it, right? What does it matter about your intent, right? Your intent was to give. Now your intent could have been like Roger, maybe your intent was just to get this guy off your back because you felt a little guilty because you had money in your hand.
That's exactly what it was. I didn't want to hear it is, please don't stab me.
Or Joni just said, or to get a tax deduction. Maybe you give $25 to something because you need the tax deduction. Now, does that mean you fulfilled the mitzvah? Now, according to the Talmud and the Mishnah, if your intent was to give tzedakah, even if you gave it begrudgingly, that's one of Maimonides' levels. Even if you gave it and you said, I can't stand these beggars, I can't stand the fact that they're in my face, but I'm going to do it because it's tzedakah, right? Then you fulfilled it. Now, if you just said, I can't stand these beggars, but I want to get them off my back, here's $1, you were not at all aware of being a mitzvah. You did it, doesn't mean it was a bad deed, it was a good deed. You may have done it begrudgingly in a bad way, but you did a good thing, but it's not a mitzvah. What makes it a mitzvah is you're being aware of it. Because otherwise, what distinguishes charity from tzedakah? Right? Charity is a good thing. All religions, all people give, most people give charity. But if it's not a Jewish value, you're not giving it as a Jew, you're giving it as a human being, which is a good thing. But the mitzvahs are about our obligation to God or to our tradition and fulfilling them because of who we are and our religion and our tradition. Alice.
I was just going to bring this back to our bar mitzvahs. For many, many years, I attended 1 and 2 bar mitzvahs every weekend. And it was always the identical. It was a pat bar mitzvah. It was always the same music. It was always the same wording. There was never a difference. And then Cantor Siegel came. And every week she has a different song for us that has to do with the Torah portion. And that to me is the difference between keva and kavanah. When she did a song about the Torah portion, we really felt like we were more into it than, hearing just the same thing, never changing. And that to me is kavanah. Where there was such a spiritual feeling when she brought these new melodies. And that's kavanah to me.
Okay. So interestingly enough, as you know, when you were executive director, we heard complaints from some of our old timers that we weren't doing the right Ein Keloheinu. Because for some people, the old Adon Olam, the old Ein Keloheinu, the old Shema Kolenu, those were kavanah. For them, the moment they looked for was not the new melody. They looked for the old melody that brought them back to when they were younger and they were sitting next to their bubbi or zaidi or their parents or whatever. So kavanah can come in many different ways, but it isn't always about newness. It's about you. It's what you bring to that moment. If you bring intent to the moment, even a rote prayer can be a moment of elevation. But we don't always bring that. We can't. Human beings can't live at that level. We can't live with intention constantly. But if we train ourselves, we're back to the soldier, Marty. If we learn to march in a certain way, we will be able to work with our platoon in harmony. And when the moment comes that I am needed, I will rise to the occasion because I've been trained and it's part of who I am. And I can elevate myself. If I don't even know the words, if I don't feel anything because I don't know anything, how can I be more than just there? And that's the discussion that we're having, right? It's not just about Zedaka or the Shofar or prayer. It's about what are these mitzvot and what do they mean? And is it enough to just do the mitzvah, to just do the act? And bottom line is, from a Jewish standpoint, if you are aware of it being a mitzvah, it counts. It isn't necessarily like the highest level of tzedakah, but if you give it begrudgingly and you know it's tzedakah, you gave it and you fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, I do want to remind, most people don't know, but Maimonides' 8 levels of tzedakah, there's a minimum. The first level is 10%. That is, he was starting with the notion that tzedakah is an asara, it's 1/10. And then it's you give it begrudgingly. And then it's you give it anonymously, you know? That's where he was. And remember, it was a different time. They paid a different kind of taxes than we do. They had a very different system of supporting systems. Yes, Larry.
So my sense is that we can apply kavanah also to the negative mitzvot. So if I decide not to steal and say I'm not stealing because God doesn't want me to, then I have kavanah. But if I say I'm not going to steal because I could go to jail, that's a different perspective. Am I right? Am I missing the boat here, or is?
Well, no. The negative mitzvot are in a very different category, because all of the negative mitzvot, you get credit for them by not doing them, even if you're not aware of them.
So there's no intentionality then?
No, because that would mean that a person who was a kleptomaniac, who found within themselves the ability to resist that in them, would get credit, but an honest person would get no credit for not stealing. And from a Jewish standpoint, there's always the possibility that an honest person can stray. So you always, by fulfilling not stealing, you always get credit for that. By not killing, you always get credit. Alice brought up the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah students. When I met with them, I would always tell them, you get credit for 300. I say to them, have you killed anybody? Did you steal yesterday? You know, you're getting credit. Think of that. You get credit for mitzvot by not doing all this. And then I said, let's look at the other mitzvot. Which ones are you doing? And those are the ones we're talking about, right? And that makes sense because, you know, there are mitzvot like you're not supposed to gossip. Well, that's a tough one. Most of us, that's a real tough one, right? Not supposed to gossip. So just by not gossiping, you get credit. That's hard. That takes intention for most people, especially in our world, in a social world. Okay, let's go to the last text, and then we'll finish. We'll have our discussion on that because that's a little more complicated. Share, got it. Look at that. Okay, and now we go down. All right, Adam Seligman, professor who has written extensively on this area. I'm going to read this, and take us through it. All right, while ritual activity carries its own form of intentionality, it's important to note that ritual is not necessarily concerned with what we term sincerity. In any ritual, as with saying please and thank you. By the way, any of you that have raised children, how many times did you try to teach your child to say please and thank you until one day you actually heard from someone outside your home that your child is so polite? Please and thank you. And they have never said it in your home without you reminding them. That is part of the ritual of training. So performing the act marks acceptance of the convention. It does not matter how you may feel about the convention, if you identify with it or not. In doing a ritual, the whole issue of our internal states is often irrelevant. You are is what you are doing, which is, of course, an external act. This is very different from modernist concerns about sincerity and authenticity. Getting it right is not a matter of making outer acts conform to inner beliefs. Getting it right is doing it again and again and again. It's an act of world construction. You're creating a world. As an ideal type, the self who does ritual is very different from the self who is sincere. We reject the view of ritual as the non-essential husk of something else that is more real, meaning they're both just as important and real. Ritual and intention are just as real. Ritual acts and practitioners are not, after all, hypocritical because they give external signs for an internal state that may not be present. The very eternal performative aspects of ritual, especially their repetition and recollection of places not given to purely rational or instrumental computation, give it a unique lability. As structured duality, ritual is an important tool for encompassing the ambiguity of life.
You need, Rabbi,
Yeah.
go back and focus on those last couple sentences. We need some explication of,
The building.
you do. You lost me.
Okay. So from a Jewish standpoint, it says we reject the view that this is not an essential thing to just do it. We say that both ritual acts and intentional acts are both valuable. That to create a world, you need to have ritual. In order to have good gums, you need to floss on a daily basis or pretty regularly, right? If you only every once in a while say, oh, I think the dentist told me I should floss, and you do it, what you're going to do is bleed. Right? And you're going to have gum problems. And then you're going to have to go to the dentist more often. If you do it every day on a regular basis, your gums will be healthier. That ritual has value, even if you don't intend it, don't care about it, don't think about it. You just do it as part of what you do when you do your teeth. You brush, you floss, and you do it, right? And it's true about the same notion of, let's say you don't like vegetables, but your doctor has said to you, you need vegetables for your health. And you've gotten into the ritual of having vegetables on a regular basis. It's still healthy, whether you like it or not, whether you enjoy it or not. You may still enjoy a good steak, and it may not be so healthy for you, but those vegetables are doing something for you, whether you know it or intend or not, right? That's what it's saying. So then he goes on, over and against this model of ritual, I wish now to enter into a characterization of the sincere model of action and understanding. Sincerity often grows out of a reaction against ritual. It criticizes ritual's acceptance of social convention as mere action, perhaps even just acting, without intent, as performance without belief. The alternatives it often suggests are categories that grow out of individual soul searching rather than the acceptance of social conventions. The sincere mode of behavior seeks to replace the mere convention of ritual with a genuine and thoughtful state of internal conviction. Rather than becoming what we do in action through ritual, we do according to what we become through self-examination. This form of thought emphasizes tropes of authenticity, and each individual thus takes on an enormous responsibility. So those are the two forms he's saying. They are different, but one criticizes the other, and he's saying that's not necessary. Both of them have value. Both being intentionally doing something, and having that moment of kavanah, and ritually doing something without kavanah. From the point of view of sincerity, ritual is mere hypocrisy and convention, meaning that's how it looks from people that have this view of sincerity. Viewed from ritual, however, sincerity can threaten the very existence of society by refusing conventions, meaning there's no please and thank you unless we build ritual. Unless you teach please and thank you, unless you teach kindness, you don't get kindness for most people. It's a learned process. Unless you teach sharing, there isn't going to be a lot of sharing in the world, right? It's ritual sharing. You share that with your sister, share that with your friend because it's the right thing to do. But I don't want to share. But you come to kid comes to a birthday party. But I want presents, but it's not your birthday. So what do? We give them a goodie bag to make them feel a little better. But they need to learn it's not their birthday. And this other person gets to be the spotlight that time, right? So teaching both becomes important. Though the tension between the two usually remains under control, it can also lead to shifts in the balance between ritual and sincerity, as nearly any of the world religious tradition shows. So Buddhism has criticized Hinduism because of the ritual of offering sacrifices instead of the intention that is part of Buddhism. And Christianity has criticized Judaism for being a legalistic tradition, not a religion of love. We've all heard that, right? Because they're saying love, intention, you need to do it out of love. Judaism is saying you do it out of ritual. Now, that doesn't mean Judaism doesn't have love within it, but we are a tradition that is based on ritual. And by the way, as he will show you now, examples also imply reform movements based on sincerity tend to be tamed over time with new creations of ritual. Look at the Catholic Church, ostensibly built on love, but it is all about ritual, right? To be a good Catholic in a church setting, everything is about the ritual and following it and how you follow it, how it's done. If you ever watch the priest administer the Eucharist, you watch every aspect of it is prescribed, including they have like a napkin in order to wipe the wine so that none of the blood of Christ is lost. It's on the napkin, right? There's a ritual that evolves even out of a religion that ostensibly is about intention. Extreme forms of sincerity discourage all ritual-like behavior, all subjunctives, not just ritualized religious practice, but music, adult play, dance, even humor. Thus, in fact, a life of pure ritual or pure sincerity would be absurd. Both modes of thought coexist in us all, though not without tension. Okay, what do you think about that?
Rabbi, I have a question. This is Patty. A
Hi,
lot of that sounded to me like a very postmodern existentialism on the side of the critique of ritual in favor of this authenticity, and that taking the whole responsibility through the intent. Am I just reading into that, or because it seems a very common thing of a psychological culture like ours to say that it's the intention, it's the inner states, it's the process by which you self-actualize that gives value to an action. And I just read a little bit of that in there. And then I also heard a little bit of Sartre's, condemnation of some of the strict order and ritual of, his time in favor of this more this authenticity that comes from, acting without an essence, just acting from choice, just having meaning by choice. There's some of that in there. It just seemed echoes to me of that.
Well, the argument is not just postmodern. It actually, so the critique of Judaism by Christianity happened, 2,000 years, 1,800 years ago. And Buddhism and Hinduism have been in conflict for a very, very long time about the way they approach things. The tension between ritual and intention or sincerity, the way he put it, is a reality. But the question is, we ask as Jews, how can a society exist without ritual? And we argue it can't. And if you even, we talked about turning, you talked about, who was it that talked about turning right instead of left? Oh, Rachel. So think about it. How often do you come to a red light and you just stop? And you're not even thinking about it. You see it's red, you stop. Your mind goes wherever your mind's going. You're listening to the radio, you're talking to somebody, but you see the red line and you've been trained. When it's red, you stop. That's what you do. And when it's green, you go. Because you've been trained that is the convention. That's the law, and it's the convention of our society. I've used this before, but when I visited Venezuela, I did a wedding down there a number of years ago. I was only in Venezuela for a day and a half, and it was during the time of they were having gangs that were carjacking. And I was being given a tour by one of the people who had brought me there. And he was running through red lights, and I was really nervous. And he said, if you stop, they will carjack you and maybe kill you.
Oh my.
So there, red light had to be avoided because of the violence that existed uncontrolled. When you no longer have rules of ritual, that's what society becomes, right? You need to have boundaries, you need to have rules, you need to have conventions. I remember I was asked once by someone close to us, whenever when I want something from Joni, I ask her, please. And this person said, you're married, why are you saying please? Well, I would argue that saying please and thank you in a relationship is how you maintain a good relationship in one way. And by not saying please and thank you and just saying it, get me the dinner is not a good, healthy way to maintain a relationship.
it reminds me of when I was a really annoying little kid, but a teacher once said, "Oh, love means never having to say you're sorry." You know, because of course in the 70s that movie was the thing, right? I said, "Look,"
Right.
and I said, no, Miss So-and-so, if I don't say I'm sorry, how does my mother know that I'm sorry? You know, there had to be an action. And she was like, "It's okay, Patty. It's not a big deal. Just, get your homework in on time and don't think about it so much."
Well, having been married almost 53 years, I can tell you, loving someone is saying you're sorry. Often. Right.
Rabbi,
Yes.
do you think that Reform Judaism, getting some of the ritual back, saw that the ritual that even we had given up was important in maintaining who we were?
It's interesting, Kathy, Reform has always had ritual, but some of its ritual was not doing the traditional ritual. So for instance, I was told that Temple Israel here downtown, before I came years ago when Rabbi Neret was there, if you had a kippah on, they would take it off your head. Escher would take it off your head. Because the ritual in a Reformed synagogue of Temple Israel was you don't wear a kippah. That was a ritual. And if you had one on, it comes off. Rabbi Neret would not allow people to break a glass at a chuppah because it was the Reform ritual. So some of the rituals are what we do and what we don't do. And Reform has always been strict about what we say and what we don't. But over time, we began to revisit tradition and say, maybe there is a nice Reform way of embracing that. Not as an Orthodox Jew, but in a positive way, in a different way, and we bring it in. For instance, we do Misha Berach. Now, Debbie Friedman wrote this piece, and it started getting used. We never did that before in Reform. I didn't know any Reform synagogue that did Misha Berach, but once the song was there, we started evolving a ritual around it. And now, not only do Reform synagogues use it, conservative synagogues use it, and there are even some traditional Orthodox synagogues that will use the melody. And they will use it, and they develop new rituals around the Misha Berach. We ask people, right, for names. People send in names. None of that happened before in Reform. And it wasn't that we took the old ritual, but we took the idea, Debbie took the idea, translated it into a modern song, and that then was reshaped into our rituals. And it continues to be reshaped. So even though it was a tradition from Orthodoxy, when I first was a rabbi, I guess we'll end with this, in Worcester, Massachusetts, that I had a bar mitzvah that summer, and I had been asked to do a Misha, no, I was asked to do to Gomer, to bench Gomel. First of all, I had never been taught what Gomel was in rabbinical school, so I had to go look it up. And then I did it at the service because the family had asked me to do it. Someone had an operation or something, and they were there and they wanted to say this prayer for having lived through a life-threatening situation. So I did it. Well, afterward, my president came up to me and said, "We don't do that. Why did you do that? We're Reform." Now, the president had come from an Orthodox tradition and knew that it was an Orthodox prayer, but rejected the notion that her synagogue should do it. Now, I didn't know because I grew up in a Reform synagogue. I didn't know what Gomel was. So for me, it was new. It was a new ritual. It seemed cool, a new prayer. I was interested, but eventually Gomel we do now. We do a lot of different things that we didn't do before, not because they're traditional and orthodox, but because we rediscovered meaning in them. And that's the Reformed tradition. So next week, we will conclude this three-part thing. I hope it kind of enlightened you with some of the notion of kavanah, intention, and ritual.
Wow.
Thank you,
Time
Rabbi.
And I
flew.
want to thank Betty. Where's Betty?
I'm right here.
Betty,
It's my
thank
pleasure.
you for doing
Great
this for us.
job, Betty.
Oh, Betty, great.
Tell Craig we don't need him anymore. We got you.
I better stop the recording before, or erase that part.
These guys will make a habit of going to ball games.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
So,
Bye-bye.
great job, Betty.